The certified letter arrived less than an hour after doctors told me my wife's condition had taken a turn for the worse. I was sitting in a hard plastic chair outside the intensive care unit at a hospital in Arizona when my phone buzzed with a notification from my security camera. A woman in a bright pink blazer had walked onto my porch and taped a large notice to my front door. I recognized her immediately. Brenda Walsh, president of our HOA. At first, I ignored it. My wife, Patricia, was in critical condition. A notice from the HOA was the last thing on my mind. Then my phone rang. It was my neighbor, Greg. "Ryan, you need to see this," he said. His voice sounded serious. "What happened?" "Brenda posted a foreclosure warning on your front door." I froze. "A what?" "A foreclosure warning. She's claiming you're months behind on violation fines." For a moment, I honestly thought he had to be mistaken. I had never missed an HOA payment in 15 years. Not once. I opened the camera footage and zoomed in on the notice. My stomach dropped. The document stated that I owed over $18,000 in accumulated fines and legal fees. According to the notice, the HOA intended to begin proceedings that could eventually result in a forced sale of my property. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The fines were supposedly related to an unapproved exterior modification. The modification? A wheelchair access ramp. The same wheelchair ramp my wife had needed after multiple surgeries over the previous year. I immediately called Brenda. She answered on the second ring. "Hello. Brenda, what is this notice?" Her voice remained calm. "You've been informed multiple times." "No, I haven't. Records show notices were mailed." I clenched my jaw. "My wife is in intensive care right now. That ramp was installed because she couldn't walk. The governing documents require architectural approval. Federal disability laws exist for a reason." There was a brief pause. Then she said something that made my blood boil. "Personal circumstances don't exempt residents from community standards." And she hung up. I sat there staring at my phone. My wife was fighting for her life, and the HOA president was trying to push us toward foreclosure over a wheelchair ramp. The next morning, I drove home to shower and grab fresh clothes. The notice was still hanging on my front door. 3 neighbors were standing across the street discussing it. They immediately stopped talking when they saw me. One of them, a retired firefighter named Scott, walked over. "Ryan, this isn't right." I nodded. "No kidding." Scott looked angry. "Brenda's been talking about your house for weeks." That got my attention. "What do you mean?" "She's telling board members your property is becoming a liability." "A liability?" He lowered his voice. "There's a developer interested in land behind our neighborhood." I frowned. So your lot connects directly to the access road they want." Suddenly, everything started making sense. My property sat on one of the largest lots in the community. The rear section bordered a parcel of undeveloped land. Developers had been trying to acquire access rights there for years. I had refused multiple offers. Nothing outrageous. Just because I liked my privacy. Scott continued. "A few months ago, Brenda was pushing everyone to approve discussions with the developer, and people voted against it. Now I understood why my house had become a target. If pressure could force me to sell, the access issue disappeared. That afternoon, I requested every HOA record related to my alleged violations. Under Arizona law, homeowners are entitled to inspect many association records. 3 days later, I received a stack of documents. The more I read, the worse it looked. Several violation notices had supposedly been mailed, but every notice was sent while my wife and I were living temporarily at her rehabilitation facility. The HOA knew that. I had informed them in writing. Even stranger, the board meeting minutes showed that several fines had been approved without discussion. In one meeting, the amount jumped from $2,000 to over $12,000 almost overnight. No explanation. No supporting documentation. Nothing. That wasn't normal. Even Scott, who had served on a previous HOA board years earlier, said he had never seen fines handled that way. Meanwhile, Patricia's condition continued to deteriorate. Doctors discovered complications that required additional procedures. Most evenings, I slept in a chair beside her hospital bed. One night, around 11 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Another security alert. I opened the camera feed, and my heart sank. Brenda wasn't alone this time. She was standing in my driveway with 2 attorneys. One of them was taking photographs of my property. The other was pointing toward the wheelchair ramp. Then Brenda looked directly at my camera, smiled, and pointed at my front door. At that moment, I realized something. This wasn't about rules. It wasn't about community standards, and it definitely wasn't about a wheelchair ramp. Someone wanted my property badly enough to weaponize the HOA. What Brenda didn't know was that earlier that same day, a board member had secretly contacted me, and the email he sent contained evidence that could destroy everything she'd been planning. The email arrived at 6:17 that morning. I was in the hospital cafeteria, holding a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. The sender was one of the HOA board members, a quiet accountant named Michael Reeves. The subject line contained only 4 words. "You need to see this." Attached were screenshots, meeting notes, and a chain of emails that immediately explained everything. As I read them, my hands started shaking. 3 months earlier, a regional development company had approached the HOA leadership about creating an access route to a large parcel of land behind our neighborhood. The project could significantly increase property values for some homeowners. But there was a problem. My property sat directly between the proposed access point and the main road. Without my cooperation, the plan became far more expensive. The developer would have to purchase additional easements elsewhere. According to the emails, representatives had asked whether I might be interested in selling. Brenda had responded herself. Her reply was short. "He has refused every offer so far." Then came another message, one that made my stomach turn. A board discussion had taken place regarding compliance enforcement options. My name appeared repeatedly, not because of unpaid dues, not because of genuine violations, because I was viewed as an obstacle. The wheelchair ramp became their opportunity. The email showed that several board members had questioned whether federal disability protections applied. One member specifically warned that targeting a medically necessary accessibility modification could create legal problems. Brenda ignored the warning. Instead, she pushed for escalating fines. Every month, every notice, every legal threat. The goal wasn't compliance. The goal was pressure. Enough pressure to make me give up and sell. For several minutes, I simply sat there staring at the screen. My wife was fighting for her life upstairs. And while that was happening, people entrusted with governing our community had been trying to exploit our situation. I forwarded every document to an attorney. Then I went upstairs to sit with Patricia. Later that afternoon, my lawyer called. His reaction was immediate. "Do not contact Brenda again." Why? Because if these records are authentic, the HOA has a serious problem. Over the next week, he obtained additional records through formal requests. The evidence kept growing. Financial reports showed unusual legal spending connected almost entirely to my property. Board meeting records contained inconsistencies. Some votes appeared to have occurred without proper notice. Several homeowners later confirmed they had never been informed about key meetings. Then another major issue surfaced. The HOA's attorney had apparently never been told that the wheelchair ramp existed because of documented medical necessity. That detail had been omitted. According to my lawyer, that omission mattered a lot. The following month, a special board meeting was scheduled. Word spread quickly throughout the neighborhood. People wanted answers. By then, many residents had learned about the emails. Attendance was the largest anyone could remember. The clubhouse was packed. Neighbors lined the walls. Others stood outside listening through open doors. Brenda entered looking confident. That confidence lasted less than 10 minutes. My attorney presented the documents. One by one, the room became quieter with every page. Residents learned about the developer discussions. They saw the emails. They saw warnings from board members that had been ignored. They saw evidence suggesting enforcement decisions had targeted a specific homeowner rather than addressing legitimate community concerns. Several people looked stunned. Others looked furious. Then Michael stood up. For the first time publicly, he confirmed the documents were genuine. The room erupted. Questions came from every direction. Why weren't homeowners informed? Why had legal fees exploded? Why was the HOA spending so much money pursuing a family dealing with a medical crisis? Brenda attempted to defend herself. She claimed she was simply enforcing the rules. But the documents told a different story. A retired judge who lived in the neighborhood finally stood up. His voice cut through the noise. If these records are accurate, this appears far less about enforcement and far more about selective targeting. The room fell silent. Brenda had no response. Within 2 hours, the board voted to suspend all enforcement actions against my property, pending an independent review. The foreclosure process was immediately terminated. Every fine was frozen. But that wasn't the end. The independent investigation lasted nearly 3 months. Its findings were devastating. Numerous enforcement procedures had been handled improperly. Required disclosures were missing. Conflict of interest concerns had not been addressed. Record-keeping failures were widespread. Several board members resigned before the final report was released. Brenda was among them. The HOA's insurance carrier eventually became involved. Settlement discussions followed. I can't discuss every detail because of confidentiality agreements. What I can say is this. The fines disappeared permanently. The foreclosure threats vanished. The wheelchair ramp remained exactly where it belonged. And policies were rewritten to prevent similar situations from happening again. The biggest moment came several months later. Not in a courtroom, not at an HOA meeting, not during a legal proceeding. It happened in a hospital parking lot. Patricia was finally being discharged after a long recovery. The doctors had done what once seemed impossible. As I helped her into the car, she looked at me and smiled. For the first time in months, she looked like herself again. Healthy, hopeful, free. The house was still ours. The ramp was still there. And the people who tried to use our darkest moment against us had failed. Because in the end, the truth was stronger than intimidation. And no matter how powerful someone believes they are, exploiting a family during a medical crisis is a gamble that rarely ends well. Sometimes the people you think are at their weakest are simply gathering the evidence that will expose everything.